11 haunting minutes that shocked Nuremberg. The secrets behind a Nazi's final breath. History is full of moments that were never meant to be captured, and yet, someone was there with a camera. Each photograph we're about to see is not just an image, but a fragment of time, fragile, haunting, and unforgettable. Picture this: the eerie silence of the Roman catacombs, where skeletons were arranged like decorations around 1900, turning death itself into art. Or the strange homemade Halloween masks of the 1920 seconds, unsettling, almost surreal, as if the faces were pulled from a dream. Then we leap forward to a soldier in the jungles of Vietnam, 1967, holding a massive centipede, a reminder that war wasn't just fought against men, but also against nature. And in Ukraine, March 1921, a starving boy stands during the Great Famine, his hollow eyes silently screaming the tragedy of an empire collapsing. These are not polished images for history books. They are raw, real, and often disturbing. From gas attacks in World War I to the chilling presence of Irma Gress, the hyena of Auschwitz, these photographs show us the side of history that textbooks often hide. Today, we're about to dive into these rare and shocking moments. And once you've seen them, you'll never look at history the same way again. The 16th of October, 1946. In the hush chamber of Nuremberg prison, 10 high-ranking Nazis were about to face justice. One of them, Hans Michael Frank, once called the Butcher of Poland, walked toward the gallows with something no one expected: a smile. For more than 5 years, Frank had ruled over occupied Poland with an iron fist. Millions starved, ghettos were sealed, and trains full of men, women, and children were sent to extermination camps under his administration. Yet here he was, calm, even grateful, in his final moments. His execution would become one of the most awaited events of the entire Nuremberg Trials. But how did a young Bavarian lawyer, born into privilege, transform into one of the most notorious war criminals of the 20th century? To understand that chilling journey, we must go back to the very beginning, early life and first steps into extremism. Hans Frank was born on the 23rd of May 1900 in Karlsruhe, then part of the German Empire. He was the second of 3 children in a comfortable, well-off family. His father was a respected lawyer, and his mother came from a banking dynasty. But at just 10 years old, his world shattered. His mother left the family for another man in Prague, a wound that haunted his childhood and shaped his hunger for belonging. Growing up in Munich, Frank studied at the Maximilians Gymnasium, where he excelled intellectually. At 17, he joined the German army during World War I, though he never saw frontline combat. The end of the war brought chaos to Germany. Like many disillusioned veterans, Frank drifted toward the Freikorps, a paramilitary group that violently crushed left-wing uprisings, including the Bavarian Soviet Republic in 1919. It was in this atmosphere of defeat, humiliation, and radical politics that Frank's path converged with dangerous ideologies. He became involved with the occultist Thule Society, an organization that heavily influenced the creation of the German Workers' Party, the group that would soon evolve into the Nazi Party. By 1923, Frank had fully embraced Hitler's rising movement, joining the infamous Brownshirts, SA, and even participating in the failed beer hall putsch. 16 Nazis and 4 policemen were killed that day. Hitler was imprisoned, and Frank briefly fled to Italy. Already, his life was bound to the fate of the Nazi cause, marriage and rise in the Nazi Party. In 1925, Hans Frank returned to Munich. That same year, he married Brigitte Herbst, a stenographer working in the Bavarian State Chamber. For Brigitte, marriage to a young lawyer from a wealthy family seemed like a ticket to security and prestige. For Frank, it was the beginning of a turbulent union. Brigitte was ambitious and strong-willed. She often manipulated him, reminding him, "Hans, I gave you 5 children." Their relationship was marked by constant tension, yet together they built a family of 5 between 1927 and 1939, one of whom, Nicholas Frank, would later publicly denounce his father as a criminal. By the late 1922, Frank's career intertwined completely with the Nazi movement. In 1929, Adolf Hitler personally appointed him as chief legal advisor and head of the party's legal department. It was a position of immense influence. Frank handled more than 2,000 400 court cases for the party, constantly clashing with established German jurists who still believed in constitutional law. The Nazi rise to power in 1930, when they won 107 seats in parliament, catapulted Frank further. With Hitler's appointment as Chancellor in 1933, Frank's influence grew dramatically. He became Minister of Justice in Bavaria, then Reich Minister without portfolio, and eventually the Nazi Party's supreme authority on legal matters. By 1934, he even served as one of 3 judges on the party's Supreme Court, directly shaping the regime's twisted version of justice. Ironically, despite his loyalty to Nazi ideology, Frank sometimes opposed unchecked violence when it bypassed legal frameworks. He criticized extrajudicial killings at Dachau and condemned the bloody purge of the Night of the Long Knives in 1934. To Frank, the power of law was not to restrain tyranny but to legitimize it. He believed judges should protect the racial community by codifying Nazi principles into the legal system, building alliances and spreading influence. By the mid-1932, Frank was more than a bureaucrat. He was becoming an international representative of Nazi Germany. In 1936, during a visit to Rome, he met Benito Mussolini and impressed him with fluent Italian. Later that year, Frank personally delivered an invitation from Hitler to Mussolini, forging ties between the 2 fascist leaders. He was, in many ways, Hitler's legal ambassador abroad. But within Germany, darker tides were rising. On the 9th of November, 1938, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, erupted. Synagogues were set ablaze, thousands of Jewish-owned businesses destroyed, and nearly 30,000 Jews deported to camps. Frank's wife Brigitte, who had previously done business with Jewish families, showed no sympathy to those begging for help. The Franks were now fully complicit in the anti-Jewish machinery of the Reich, and then came the 1st of September, 1939, the day Germany invaded Poland. It was the moment that would define Hans Frank's fate forever. Governor-General of Poland, the Butcher of Poland. On the 26th of October 1939, just weeks after Germany invaded Poland, Hitler rewarded Hans Frank with a new title, Governor, General of the General Government, the central portion of occupied Poland. To his wife Brigitte, Frank proudly declared, "You will be the Queen of Poland." To the Polish people, however, his rule meant terror, starvation, and death. The general government held 12 million people, including 1.5 million Jews. Frank quickly envisioned the region as nothing more than a colony for the Reich. He boasted that Poles would be reduced to slaves of the German Empire. From his headquarters in Wawel Castle, Krakow, Frank oversaw brutal policies of forced labor, mass executions, and systematic plunder. Yet his authority was never absolute. Much of the true power lay with the SS under Heinrich Himmler and the Gestapo. Frank often clashed with them, complaining bitterly that they ignored his administration. But even if his control was limited, he facilitated the system that enabled mass killings. When he questioned Himmler about a concentration camp, the reply was blunt: "That's none of your business." Still, Frank played his role ensuring the trains ran, the ghettos were walled, and the food rations cut. By 1940, Warsaw's Jewish population was sealed inside a ghetto. Over 400,000 people were crammed into just a few square kilometers, slowly starved with rations as low as 200 calories per day. Disease, hunger, and cold killed 100,000 before the mass deportations even began. Frank's administration deliberately withheld coal and food, weaponizing deprivation itself. It was murder by starvation, carried out under the pretense of law. The ghetto became an open-air prison, and later, a waiting room for death. Between the summer of 1942 and September's Yom Kippur, 250,000 Jews were deported from Warsaw, most to Treblinka. The rest would die in later waves, or in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising of 1943, when starving fighters resisted German liquidation with smuggled weapons. For 3 months, 1,000 Jews held off SS units until they were crushed and the survivors sent to camps. The machinery of the Holocaust. Historians still debate the exact moment the Nazis decided upon the final solution, but by late 1941, the machinery was already in motion. Under Frank's jurisdiction lay 4 of the 6 major extermination camps: Treblinka, Belzec, Sobibor, and Majdanek. Nearby Auschwitz-Birkenau, while technically outside his territory, also relied on the administrative network he helped maintain. In total, over 3 million Jews were murdered in camps within or adjacent to his general government. Frank's role was not that of a mere bystander. His administration identified Jewish families, registered them, seized their property, and coordinated the transports. Once those trains departed, their passengers rarely returned. He knew what was happening. He admitted in meetings, "In relation to the Jews, we must finish them off." Well, this was the legacy that earned him the name the Butcher of Poland. And as the tides of war began to turn, he would face the consequences of the empire he helped build. War turns, resistance rises, and the assassination attempt. At first, the Nazi conquest seemed unstoppable. In the spring of 1940, Denmark and Norway fell. Within 6 weeks, the Netherlands and France collapsed under blitzkrieg, but Britain held firm, and when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, the tide of war began to shift. By that winter, the German advance stalled in front of Moscow. Thousands of soldiers froze and starved, and for the first time, defeat loomed. In occupied Poland, the brutality only intensified. Resistance networks grew bolder, supported by the Polish government in exile and later by the advancing Soviets. By 1943, the Polish secret state orchestrated assassinations of German officials across the general government. Inspired by the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich in Prague, they even targeted Hans Frank himself. On the 29th of January 1944, as Frank's train sped through the night from Krakow to Lviv, a bomb exploded beneath his carriage. The blast tore the rear axle from the governor's car and derailed part of the train. Miraculously, Frank survived without injury. Furious, he ordered executions of Polish prisoners in retaliation and tightened security across his territory. But the attack proved a point. Even the King of Poland was no longer untouchable. Collapse of the general government. By 1944, Germany was in retreat on all fronts. The Soviets pushed westward, while the Allies invaded Italy and stormed the beaches of Normandy. In Poland, resistance culminated in the Warsaw Uprising of the 1st of August 1944. For 2 months, Polish fighters held out against overwhelming German forces. The uprising was brutally crushed, leaving Warsaw in ruins and tens of thousands executed or deported. Frank remained in Krakow, but his power was fading rapidly. He drank heavily, his offices littered with empty bottles. The once proud governor was reduced to a shadow, issuing orders no one obeyed. On the 17th of January 1945, as Soviet tanks closed in, he abandoned Krakow in a convoy of cars. Within 24 hours, the city fell, and his 5-year reign of terror ended in flight. Back in Bavaria, Frank attempted to offer his services again to the collapsing Reich. But Hitler had already stripped him of his positions in 1942 after repeated clashes with the SS. Now, he was little more than a drunk ex-official, irrelevant and despised. By May 1945, Germany surrendered. Hans Frank was captured by American troops in southern Bavaria, the very same unit that had just liberated Dachau. They forced him to walk a gauntlet of angry soldiers, many of whom had seen the horrors of the camps. Humiliated and beaten, Frank tried to commit suicide twice, slitting his wrist but surviving. He was destined to stand trial. The Nuremberg Trials. The war was over, but justice had only just begun. On the 1st of October 1946, after nearly a year of proceedings, the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg announced its verdicts. 21 of the most powerful figures of the Third Reich faced judgment. 12 would be sentenced to death. Among them, Hans Frank, the former governor, general of occupied Poland. During the trial, Frank shocked many by expressing a degree of remorse. He converted to Catholicism in his cell, claimed to have visions of God, and told the court, "From the depths of my feelings, I am possessed by a profound sense of guilt. Those of us who are guilty must pay the price." Yet, his remorse could not erase the evidence. Documents from his Krakow offices, carelessly left behind when he fled, revealed in chilling detail how his administration had starved ghettos, deported millions, and facilitated the murder of more than 3 million Jews. His defense tried to argue that he lacked control, that the SS acted independently, that he was merely a civil administrator, but the tribunal found him guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. As the sentence was read, death by hanging, Frank did not protest. "Death by hanging," he said quietly. "I deserved that and expected it." The execution. On the night of the 16th of October 1946, Hans Frank was led into the execution chamber, the fifth man to face the gallows that evening. To the surprise of witnesses, he entered with a smile. His final words were calm. "I am grateful for the treatment I received during my captivity, and I ask God to receive me with mercy." But what followed was anything but merciful. U.S. Army Sergeant John C. Woods, the executioner, was notoriously careless. The drop was too short to break Frank's neck. Instead, he strangled slowly, convulsing for 11 agonizing minutes before death finally came. He was just 46 years old. His body was cremated, and the ashes scattered in the Isar River, leaving nothing behind. No grave, no monument, only the memory of a man who had risen high, ruled cruelly, and died disgracefully. Closing reflections. Hans Frank's story is a chilling reminder of how ordinary men can become architects of extraordinary evil. A lawyer, once trained to uphold justice, instead twisted the law into a weapon of oppression. He sought power, prestige, and favor with Hitler, and in doing so, condemned millions. At Nuremberg, his final smile could not mask the truth. His legacy was written in the ashes of ghettos, in the silence of trains bound for death camps, and in the millions of lives destroyed under his rule. History remembered him not as a statesman, nor even as a loyal Nazi official, but as the butcher of Poland and one of the darkest figures ever to stand trial for crimes against humanity.